The queue for the public bathhouse begins before dawn. Adults dressed in thick woolen clothes, carrying laundry baskets and bundles of dry birch branches, patiently shift from foot to foot at the door, where the smell of wet oak mingles with warm ashes. Next door, at the drain, a board hangs on a hook with fines. Laundresses are not allowed to pour lye into the drinking ditch. Ashes must be stored until they are taken to the communal yard, and buckets of slop may only be emptied after the bell rings. This is not a picture of eternal filth, but a noisy routine of cleanliness that will be disrupted later. And that is why it is not order, but prohibitions that will be remembered. I welcome you. Tell me where you are watching this episode from, which city and which country, and I will try to be your calm guide. Write in the comments how water and sewage issues are dealt with in your area, and I wish you attentive listening. What follows is a dry but disturbing chronicle of bathhouses, laundries, and penalty books, from which real life, not caricature, sticks out. Everyday life in such texts smells of smoke. Bathhouse regulations require adult stokers to keep a supply of dry firewood for several days, to mark the price of a log in writing, and to record how many times a week the stones are poured. They also list which herbs are allowed in the steam room, who has the right to light the fire, and when it is permissible to open the doors to the street for ventilation. The regulations specify the schedule for men's and women's hours, but the main thing is not the hours, but the sanitary regime. The water is changed, the sludge is removed, the ashes are dried and used for lye. If there is a shortage of firewood, the bathhouse reduces its hours, but does not cancel the garbage removal regime. On the bench at the entrance, there is a list of regular visitors who contribute firewood or coins and have the right to vote on complaints. Thus, cleanliness turns into accounting. People pay for heat, are responsible for drainage, and are asked about order. Legends love darkness, but documents love neighbors. Complaints to the city office are invariably monotonous. Adult laundresses wash too close to the communal spring. Lye flows into the drinking ditch. Children from artisan courtyards play by the ditches and scatter ashes, which is why the smell lingers in the street longer than it should. The office requires that the washerwomen rinse the fabrics in the lower drainage channel, not upstream, and imposes fines of varying severity depending on the number of repeat offenses. Bathhouse owners are responsible for cleaning the stone trough and issuing wooden shutters during times of high traffic. These minor details, born out of neighbors' complaints, form the backbone of urban cleanliness. Not heroes, but lists. Fuel prices are the most obvious barometer. In the cold months, the cost of a bundle of wood rises, and the city begins to subsidize the bathhouse with grain or deferred rent payments so that the stoves do not have to be shut down. The statutes prescribe free admission for poor adults on the parish list several times a week, but only at the hour when there are the fewest crowds, so as not to disturb the peace. The right to wash becomes a matter of record, not charity. There are also strict rules. It is forbidden to bring people with a plague mark to the bathhouse when a danger has been declared. It is forbidden to keep the doors open if bad news is circulating in the neighborhood. Not because the bathhouse is evil, but because people's fear of water is stronger than their memory of a bucket of boiling water with ashes. The first prepared turn is hidden in the word closure. During outbreaks, the city temporarily locks the bathhouses, puts seals on the doors, and distributes stoves to the courtyards so that the heat does not escape. Years later, this measure will be interpreted as proof of eternal filth, as if people preferred stench to water. In reality, the closure was a sanitary break, not a worldview. During times of danger, public baths were prohibited, but washing with lye and airing courtyards were not cancelled. Laundry workers were transferred to lower drains, where the water carried the sludge further downstream, and were forced to boil laundry longer than usual. The accounts show purchases of extra fuel for large boilers. Only the word "locked" will remain in legends. while books will retain a long column of expenses for boiling. The second turn is imperceptible, but more acute. Penalty books. Where retellings laugh at absurd hygiene, in reality there are neat lines. Adult laundresses are fined for draining lye upstream. The owner of a bathhouse is punished for an unclean trough. A shopkeeper who dumped ashes on the pavement is obliged to take them to the communal yard. Craftsmen are warned for storing dirty wool at the water intake. The amounts are small, but the frequency is high. Each such sheet is a small pump, pumping dirt from a residential area to the outskirts. These books show how cleanliness becomes part of the urban economy. Fines cover the work of porters and watchmen, and order turns into paid labor. The third shift is in the language of morality. Later, moralists preferred to see bathhouses as places of debauchery, and rejoiced at their closure as a victory for decency. However, the statutes say otherwise. Adults wash, craftsmen wash, sick people who are prescribed steam by their doctors wash, but only at designated times and under the supervision of a guard. Noisy feasts are not welcome inside. Those who bring wine are not welcome at the entrance. The regulations punish not intimacy, but dirt, and this confuses the picture in which people supposedly lived amid eternal stench and did not know water. Later, ideology wanted dark ages, but the account books left us with purchases of brooms and ash drying. Everyday life sounds dry, but it is what holds the narrative together. On certain days, the city orders the drains to be closed when the river is in flood, so that the dirt does not return to the courtyards through the overflow, and punishes those who open the valves ahead of time. During certain weeks, they prescribe storing ashes in boxes rather than open baskets, so that the wind does not carry dust to the market. At certain hours, they announce a ban on washing in the upper reaches of the river due to rituals and processions, so that the water does not smell of lye near the temple doors. All this links sanitary logic with the religious calendar, and at this intersection, tension arises. The ancient habit of cleanliness does not disappear, but slows down so as not to anger neighbors and not to disturb people who are afraid of contagion. Another layer is visible in fuel calculations. To keep the steam even, stokers cut oak into identical logs and record their consumption overnight. When there is a shortage of wood, the city allocates coal, but requires that the streets not be smoked and that chimneys be cleaned more often. Baskets of selected ash appear in shops, which laundresses buy for a small coin. Ash is the currency of everyday cleanliness. Lye is boiled for a long time. Laundry is boiled until the fabric stops squeaking with grease, and only then is rinsing allowed in the drains, where the current will carry away the sludge. In poor neighborhoods, they boil without baths at all, in courtyard boilers, and this is also cleanliness, not its absence. When the city is frightened by the plague, order breaks down, but it does not disappear. Public baths are banned, laundry hours are reduced, rinsing places are moved, and fines for violating the rules are increased. Guards patrol the bridges, monitor the sluice gates, and require that slop be kept until evening and taken to the community compost pits. The strictness is not directed against water as such, but against the accumulation of bodies in one room and against the mixing of sewage with the drinking water network. Later, retellings will leave only cries about filth, although reality stubbornly shows us discipline. Where disease is feared, buckets and hours are counted. Mythological conflicts with the document stretch from these lines like a thread from wet fabric. Myth requires a dark picture where no one washed and no one understood the benefits of steam. The paper stubbornly responds with lists. Who was on duty at the bath stove? Who took out the ashes? Who paid the fine? Who moved the rinsing place below the bridge? Who ordered new dampers for the drainage trays? This is an inconvenient truth because it destroys simple mockery. Reality is less like an anecdote and more like an inventory. In it, you can see adults standing wearily in line for the bathhouse at dawn and arguing at the fines board. You can see laundresses dragging buckets to the lower drains. You can see the watchman spoiling the morning by asking to close the damper. And you can see the city, which, fearing contagion, temporarily closes the doors of the bathhouse and then reopens them along with the expense book, because without this book, the dirt really does become eternal. At the other end of the line to the bathhouse, you can hear the dull creak of scales. The stoker weighs armfuls of firewood and writes down the numbers line by line in a notebook, like in a shop where they count salt and yarn. Nearby, brooms are drying on a hook. Under the bench is a bucket of ash for lye. On the wall is a board with the hours for the men's and women's sections, and under the board is a small table of expenses, where the names of those who brought logs or coins are written. In the middle of the week, laundresses come here with wooden tubs, and the guard makes sure that the rinsing water goes into the lower drain and not into the drinking trough. Those who violate the rules are entered into the penalty book. The lines are dry, repetitive, without drama, but with consequences. Money goes to repairing the dampers, paying the porters, and removing the slag to the communal yard. And if there is a smell of smoke somewhere nearby, it is not because people do not know how to wash, but because the cleaning machine is working, heating water and burning wood, turning fat into soapy lye. In city ordinances, fire and water are like neighbors who are bound to quarrel but inevitably live side by side. Bathhouse regulations prescribe uniform heat, changing the water, drying the floor, ventilating the doors every hour, prohibiting food and wine in the steam rooms, prohibiting brooms near the open hearth, and listing the herbs that are allowed for steam. In the same books, the city reminds adult craftsmen that dirty wool cannot be stored near the upper drainage channel, and that lye must be carried out in closed buckets. Laundresses are allowed to take ash from shops according to lists, but are warned that it is forbidden to pour it near the well. The statutory lines are clumsy, but clearly outline the habit of cleanliness: boiling, steaming, airing, draining, removal, disposal. This is not a picture of the Dark Ages. It is a schedule for hot stones and cold water. During the cold months, fuel prices rise, and cities begin to maneuver to keep the steam going. Municipal councils reduce rents for bathhouse owners, give them several cartloads of firewood in lieu of payment, and sometimes allocate coal on condition that they clean their pipes frequently and refrain from smoking in the streets. At the same time, the parish schedules free hours for poor adults, not for entertainment, but for prevention, because dirt in crowded neighborhoods is too expensive. These lines cut through the legend that people supposedly lived without water and did not know baths. Reality shows the economics of heat, where cleanliness is not a whim, but an expense that they try not to cut to zero even in hungry winters. The unpleasant truth is also evident there. When fuel is critically scarce, the bathhouse is temporarily put on a reduced schedule, and some of the laundry work is moved to the courtyards, where laundry is boiled in large cauldrons and strictly monitored for drainage. Neighbors are the chief editors of sanitary history. Complaints to the office sound the same. In one house, lye is drained at the very staircase. In another, buckets are kept at the drinking trough. In a third, wool is dried over the common drain, causing the smell to linger for days. The response is predictable: a fine, an order, and an inspection of compliance within a few days. A repeat offense means a heavier fine and an entry in the quarterly book. These boring entries are the pulse of urban cleanliness. It is not loud, but it is constant. Where late pamphlets paint a caricature of eternal filth, municipal journals methodically record who opened the valve and when, who cleaned the gutter, who bought new buckets, and who took the slag to the outskirts. With the advent of epidemic alarm, Order does not disappear, it changes form. The temporary closure of bathhouses looks like a sanitary break on paper. Doors are sealed, stoves are muffled, stokers are distributed among the courtyards to boil laundry in boilers, rinsing is transferred to lower drains with reinforced security, and slop is ordered to be kept until the evening signal and taken to communal pits. Guards are given the right to stop the troughs at the upper bridges so that the lye does not reach the springs. A bizarre spike in the cost of firewood and ash appears in the accounts. They are boiling longer than usual. Later, this will be interpreted as the authorities closed the baths because dirt is their norm, although in reality, the closure protected against overcrowding and did not promote uncleanliness. The machine of cleanliness was not turned off. It was redistributed to a space where the air flows faster and the water carries the mud further away. The moral layer gives shape to shadows, but confuses directions. Preachers love to denounce the delights of steam rooms, and in days of fear, revel in the word prohibition, as if the closure itself were a victory of decency over the flesh. However, the statutes and penalty books say otherwise. The main concern is not physicality, but currents. Penalties are imposed on those who mix sewage with drinking water, who rinse above the drains, who throw open the doors of steam rooms to the crowd on the street. Inside the baths, the usual precautions for adults remain: separate hours, checks by the guard, a ban on noisy feasts. It is not propriety that closes the doors, but sanitary considerations. And when the alarm passes, the city opens the stoves, along with the renovated trays and new dampers, and the neighborhood books show a calm "work resumed," like a record of roof repairs. Further on, a long trail of ash is visible. It passes from hand to hand like a silent currency of hygiene. Laundresses exchange it for scraps of fabric. Shopkeepers store it in boxes. Stokers dry it to make the lye strong and the boiling effective. In poor households, laundry is done on a schedule so as not to overload the drains, and signs are hung on the gates with reminders of when to take out the garbage so that the neighborhood pits do not overflow before the rain. These little things hide the main conflict with the later ideology of the Dark Ages. A light-hearted mockery does not stand up to scrutiny. Everyday life consistently invests in water, steam, ash, and clean gutters. The sad thing is that it is not these expenses that are remembered, but the line about closing during the plague week, which is taken out of context and becomes a meme about eternal filth. Sanitary logic is absorbed into urban planning. Streets where the ditches are too high are ordered to deepen the gutters. Homeowners are forced to repair their gutters so that rainwater does not flow into the drinking ditch. Pavements near water sources are cleaned more often, and shops are required to keep ashes under a lid. This costs money and time, but it pays off in fewer complaints and less odor. The same books show the tipping point. When a city runs out of money, it cuts back on cleaning schedules, and then complaints multiply and fines increase. There is nothing romantic about it, just a delicate balance between the treasury, firewood, and an impatient neighborhood. The downside of discipline is fatigue. Adults who get up before dawn to queue for the bathhouse do not feel like heroes of cleanliness. They know that the penalty board is there not for drama, but for memory. If you break the rules, you pay. If you repeat the offense, you pay more. On the third offense, the guard comes and makes you haul the slag away on a cart. The machine works without inspiration, but that is precisely what keeps the city in a state far from caricature. Hence the sad conclusion that runs through the paper. Reality is more complicated and difficult than myth because it requires stacking wood every day, boiling water, waiting your turn, drying the floor, closing the damper, and opening it again at the appointed hour. And if somewhere in this routine there is a sense of alarm, it is honest. In densely populated neighborhoods, Dirt is always just one unemptied bucket away, and only long lists of bath rules, laundry fines, and community expenses keep it on the other side of the fence. While the city lives on steam and lie, the other side of cleanliness revolves around buckets and night pits. Courtyard cesspools are lined up in a chain of responsibility. The owner must close the hatch, the neighborhood watchman checks the mark, and the night shift carters are required to take the contents to the communal compost fields on specified days. If it rains for several days in a row, the regulations become stricter. It is forbidden to pour slop into the alley. It is forbidden to open the flaps on the troughs in the middle of a downpour, and it is mandatory to keep the barrels closed and tied with canvas. The penalty books contain the names of adults who have cut corners on their way to the drainage ditch, and the amounts are not symbolic. They go to pay the people who repair the troughs during the day and close the street flaps in the evening. Thus, sanitation is not done by thought, but by craft, with pay, breaks, tools, and breakdowns. Water comes to homes on the shoulders of those who are easy to overlook. City porters are listed in registers that indicate streets, wells, and hours. They are forbidden to draw water ahead of their turn and leave lids open, and there is a fine for overturning a barrel. When the neighborhood bathhouse closes, these people become the visible part of the sanitation system. They deliver boiling water to laundresses and the elderly, report in the parish book how many trips they made during the day, and receive their allocation of ash for lye according to schedule. There is no romance, only the route, the tracks of wet wheels, bruises on the shoulders, a table with crosses for each climb. Myth prefers to remain silent about such bodies because their labor is incompatible with the image of people who do not know water. The rules of bathhouses and laundries merge with the rules of markets and ports. Near the piers, it is forbidden to rinse fabrics during unloading so as not to mix lye with drinking water from barrels on ships. In fish markets, it is mandatory to cover drainage channels with wooden boards so that blood does not flow into the common ditch. On holidays, when crowds spill into the streets, guards force tavern owners to keep their waste on their premises until the evening signal. Violations are punished not with words, but with numbers written out in full. A certain number of coins for the first offense, more for repeat offenses. In the gray fields of these books, one can see how the city tries to prevent the mixing of clean and dirty water, although the boundary between them is thin and fluid, like a stream in a trough after rain. Then begins what will later be read as a caricature. Records of temporary closures turn into the legend of "they haven't washed for centuries." But next to this sheet is another one, which lists who boiled their laundry and where, who issued new flaps, who posted guards at the footbridges, who gave the laundresses baskets for ashes, and who bought an extra supply of firewood. In the same notebook, there are complaints about neighbors who poured lye in the wrong place, and a list of people who paid fines and moved their troughs downstream. For later ridicule, one line, closed, is convenient. For life at that time, the 12 lines about detours for cleanliness are more important. They ensured that the smell did not linger in the streets for weeks, and that the laundry did not dry with a greasy film. Sanitary logic even extends to heat. Stokers keep track of fuel so as not to smoke the pipes and extinguish the stoves in the middle of the day. They have a duty to clean the stones and dry the floor between sessions, otherwise the steam room turns into a wet barn. When there is not enough firewood, the city issues coal, but tightens ventilation regulations and prohibits opening doors wide during busy hours. The stoker becomes half mechanic, half accountant. He knows how many logs are needed for one heat, how long the steam lasts, how much water needs to be poured to wash away the sludge, and how much ash needs to be collected so that the laundresses have enough to boil lye. This is not the scent of darkness, but the technological routine of a poor city, where every clean thing is paid for in minutes and fuel. The city records reveal another detail that is unpleasant for the myth. Adult illnesses regularly lead to prescribed ablutions. Medical notes indicate that steam was prescribed for those with joint pain, those with backaches, and those who needed to dry out the dampness. Of course, during general alarm due to contagion, the doors of the steam room were closed. But outside of outbreaks, water was considered an ally, not an enemy. This does not mean that cities possessed modern epidemiology. It means that they possessed simple means, did not voluntarily abandon them, and did not consider dirt to be the norm. Dirt was a threat, and so a weak but stubborn line of defense was built around it. Boiling water, lye, changing water, airing out, closed lids, schedules. Where the streets became unstable from rain, sanitary measures looked like a chain of stones. Gutters were deepened, drains were lubricated, wooden footbridges were rebuilt so as not to sink into the liquid dirt. Windy days turned the city into a workshop of lids because any gust tore the canvas covers off the garbage barrels. The guards noted who was repairing, who was lazy, who was shifting responsibility to their neighbors. Indifference was punished in the same way as direct filth, because in the cramped quarters, inaction quickly became a common smell. There are no heroes or villains on these pages. There are adults who sit tired on a bench in the evening with wet sleeves, and a city that reminds them again, take out the trash here, boil that much, close by such and such a time. Each of these so much is repeated in words, reducing the chance of confusion. Port cities keep their notebooks with particular passion because ship water follows its own rhythms. They mark drinking barrels with crosses in charcoal to know which ones have already been opened and which ones haven't. Laundry barrels are marked differently so that they are not accidentally scooped up from the gangway. Washerwomen are made to work on the lower pontoons where the water is stronger and the mud flows away faster. When an epidemic alarm is sounded, the ladders are removed from the gangways and the ship's barrels are covered with 2 layers. People are posted on the pier to make sure that the runoff does not flow back to the market. A late observer sees only a silent, closed sign. The port service register shows guards, ladders, marks on barrels, lists of people who received ashes and boiled laundry right by the water. The proximity of temples to sanitation facilities seems like a contradiction, but more often than not, it turns out to be a fragile agreement. On some days, washing is prohibited along the main street so that processions do not pass by the smell of lye. After a few hours, the ban is lifted and the washerwomen return to their troughs. Those who violate the ban are recorded in a log, as are shop owners who dump their trash right at the doorstep. This is not cleanliness versus faith, but rather a matter of time and space. Faith sets the rhythm, sanitation sets the roots. The conflict arises not from contempt for water, but from the attempt to combine a busy calendar of rituals with a busy schedule of boiling water and steam. While the baths are closed, boilers are growing in the courtyards. The city distributes ashes according to lists, issues additional barrels to parts of the neighborhood, and appoints people to monitor the drains. If somewhere smells too strong again, the guard does not go to scold, but to write down the house, the courtyard, the time, the boiling temperature, based on indirect signs, the place of rinsing. The next day, a new damper appears, and on the 3rd day, a cart driver arrives and takes away the slag. This cycle is tedious, but it is the answer to the memoirist's mockery of eternal filth. True eternity belongs not to the smell, but to the repeated efforts to remove it from the picture. In poor and crowded cities, there is no other eternity. This routine, like any work with water, leads to savings. People dry their laundry under awnings to keep it from gathering dust. They keep brooms over their hearths to prevent them from getting moldy. They bring stones into the steam rooms one at a time so as not to splash mud. Signs hang on the benches, not with slogans, but with clocks and arrows indicating how far to open the dampers. In the evening, The guards close everything that can be closed, because nighttime dirt is heavier than daytime dirt. In the morning, the adults line up again, and this line smells not of myth, but of reality. Wet oak, warm ashes, clean water, and a notebook where they will write down a new name, a fine, a damper, an armful, a handout. All in all, this is the dirty Middle Ages that was washed away. Not the purity of illusions, but labor that requires no applause and is poorly digested by caricature. The critical final touch is left to memory. Later texts like to leave a close-up of the sealed door of the bathhouse during the plague period because it is a powerful image. But if you turn the page, you will find that this frame was a pause in the work cycle. The trays were cleaned, the dampers were set, the ashes were dried, the laundry was boiled longer, rinsed lower. In documents, cleanliness always has a fragile but persistent texture. Sums, purchases, distributions, fines, checks, repetitions. And when I look at this fabric, I hear not enthusiasm, but anxiety. Honest, working anxiety, with the smell of hot stone and wet wool. This anxiety saved us from dirt better than caricatures, because it was accompanied by action. A bucket, a damper, a poker, a tray, a cue, a record. It was precisely these objects that kept the city on the paradoxical side of truth. The Dark Ages smelled of steam more often than is commonly believed, and the memory that forgot this smell remembered only the seal on the door. In cities where craft stretched in a continuous ribbon along the canals, cleanliness depended not only on baths and laundries, but also on workshops where water was part of the production process. Tanners kept their vats away from drinking wells and signed agreements to close the drains on holidays. Dyers were instructed to rinse fabrics below bridges and not to dispose of dye residues in the common ditch without dilution. The same book quietly recorded violations, adult craftsmen, fines written out in full, notes about repeat offenses, fragmentary notes from neighborhood watchmen about the smell and color of the water. In crowded neighborhoods, it seemed like a battle against the tide, but the townspeople patiently moved the boundaries, adding sluice gates, deepening the troughs, and moving the footbridges half a fathom downstream. Fatigue did not compose hymns, but the rare weeks without complaints felt like a holiday that no one wrote about, because it was created by everyday buckets and pokers. Where the water is slow, the guardians of the wells are more noticeable. These adults are not heroes, but accountants of sources. They check the covers, clean the buckets, watch over the ladders, rattle their keys at dawn, and record who put a dirty trough in a clean opening. They are appointed for a year, sometimes longer, and are held accountable if the well starts to smell. During times of alarm, they are forbidden to allow the cues to become too dense so that sweat does not drip down the stone and turn the area into a permanent puddle. The neighboring temple reminds them of processions, and the office reminds them of the washing hours below. The agreement is not based on words, but on a coincidence of schedules, where every no is explained by the root of the water and not by contempt for water itself. Bathhouse cooperatives exist at the intersection of warmth and medical routine. On some days, they replace hot stones and wipe the shelves with lye. On others, they invite an adult doctor to examine those who can use steam and those who are better off with heated water and dry rubbing. A clock hangs at the entrance, and the guard monitors the separation of the streams. When the order to close comes from the city, the cooperative does not disperse. Some go to the courtyard boilers to boil laundry, some remain in the warehouse to dry ash for the laundresses, and some take out the slag and clean the trays so that after the alarm they do not have to start from scratch. A later legend took this cycle out of context, turning the seal on the doors into a sign of eternal uncleanliness. The paper coldly objects with expenses. How much wood was used for the courtyard boilers? How much ash was issued according to the lists? How many dampers were bought while the steam rooms were silent? Laundry routes are laid out as strictly as the lines in the market. On certain days, rinsing is only allowed on the lower drains, where the stream carries away the sludge. In summer, warnings about stuffiness are posted so as not to turn the upper moat into stagnant sludge. And in autumn, inspections are intensified because the rain carries everything back in suspension. Adult laundresses live in harmony with these changes, moving troughs, carrying barrels, boiling lye under a canopy when the wind blows ash. Their work is not like jokes about the Dark Ages. It is more like water logistics, where every mistake is reflected in the smell on the street and someone else's entry in the penalty book. Where the city borders the countryside, sanitation is a matter of travel. Courtyard cesspools do not fill up overnight if the cart driver arrives on schedule, and there is no cause for alarm if the lids are tied with canvas. There are temporary signs on the bypass roads prohibiting the dumping of slop on the slopes because the rain returns it to the ditch. Water carriers take turns drawing water and keep charcoal crosses on the barrels so they know which vessels are clean and which are for rinsing. During epidemic weeks, this routine is tightened. A ban on nearby diversions, the transfer of routes to distant streams, additional pits for slag, night patrols by guards. And all this sounds like melancholy, because labor replaces the familiar noise of the steam room. But it is precisely this that shows that the closure of baths is a sanitary measure, not a worldview. The silence of the city hides another uncomfortable truth. Cleanliness is an expensive habit. When wood is scarce, decisions about bathhouses are made as if they were economic problems. Reduce hours without losing the water change regime. Issue coal on condition of more frequent pipe cleaning. Keep free hours for poor adults, but move them to less crowded locations. These steps are not memorable because they do not make for vivid images. They are replaced by caricatures, which are easier than a line about buying bath brooms. However, it is these brooms that keep the shelves from getting sticky and the water under them flowing rather than stagnant. In the narrow streets, noticeable changes occur when the gutters are deepened by a palm's width and new covers are installed. It may seem like a minor detail, but complaints decrease, and laundry workers argue less with their neighbors. Another time, the schedule for opening the sluice gates is rearranged so that the evening drainage does not coincide with the return of the procession, and there are fewer angry letters to the office. Sanitary logic rarely wins spectacular victories. Its trump card is repetition. It makes dirt boring but manageable, and there is less despair in this boredom than in a caricature of eternal stench. The myth against paper sounds particularly harsh when morality is involved. Later pamphlets preferred to associate the bathhouse with suspicious leisure activities and laundry with street shamelessness. The ordinances, however, have a different emphasis. They punish for the flow of water, for mixing sewage and drinking water channels, for open barrel lids at the well, for ash thrown on the pavement, for rinsing above the drains, for storing wet wool at the trough. Inside the baths, they monitor the silence and separation of hours. Outside, that steam does not spill out onto the street through open doors. They boil the shellock longer when it is hot, and move the troughs down when the smell is strong. This is not a dispute between cleanliness and vice. It is a table of currents. The adults in this table are porters, stokers, laundresses, watchmen, craftsmen, and clerks, not characters from picturesque extremes. Cities where trade connects docks with markets maintain sanitary rules as part of maritime regulations. Colored tags are hung on drinking water barrels. Ladders are raised on the gangways during alarms, and ship barrels are covered with 2 layers so as not to be confused with laundry tubs. Washerwomen are given the right to work on the lower pontoons, where the current is faster, and they know full well that mixing sewage with ship drinking water is a ticket to the penalty book. This seems like petty pedantry until you remember how cramped the markets are. One barrel overturned in the wrong place and the smell lingers for weeks. In the cold monastery courtyards, sanitation is organized differently, but the goal is the same. Taverns for travelers feed and provide hot water to adult travelers at certain hours, and monastic rules require washing hands before the bakery and drying pots after cooking. Hospital rooms keep warm water in reserve for compresses, and laundry is taken to distant areas so that dampness does not enter the cells. When people outside whisper about centuries of unwashed people, these walls respond with the smell of lime and wet fabric. They do not provide sensationalism, but they do provide a diary of small rules that add up to great stability. Instead of colorful legends, the register shows the mechanics of water. One adult cleans sand from the trough, another repairs the lid of the drainage barrel, a third carries slag to the outskirts, and a fourth notes in the log that today they boiled longer. On days of alarm, the guards close the footbridges, and the flow of domestic cleanliness goes to distant shores. These movements are invisible from the future, where only a frame with a sealed door remains. But it is precisely these movements that explain why the smell did not rise to the fair every week, and why the laundry hung whiter than it should have in a cartoon. Another habit that cannot be ridiculed is respect for the schedule. The sounds of the bell not only call people to service, they tell them when to take out the trash, when to close the shutters, when to open the trays after the rain. Any attempt to cut corners ends with a line in the penalty book, and that line feeds those who will buy new lids and grease the hinges tomorrow. Adults who live to this rhythm rarely see themselves as defenders of hygiene. They simply don't want their street to smell worse than usual. And this pragmatism, oddly enough, withstands the pressure of myth better than lofty words about cleanliness. When the alarm subsides, the city brings the steam rooms back to life, not with fanfare, but with repairs. They check the stones, replace cracked buckets, level the floors, put new hands on the clock faces, and throw fresh ashes into the laundry boxes. Adults line up again, and the line moves slowly, like water in a trough. Over the stone, past the damper, under the bridge, further on, to where the kerosene lamp is replaced by light, and the pungent caricature by labor. Every step of this line confirms the simple idea that has no place in a cheerful legend. The dirty Middle Ages were washed as much as fuel, order, and cramped conditions allowed. And if this phrase is less glamorous than the anecdote, it is because cleanliness is not an event, but a debt discipline of every courtyard, every shop, every stall, and every person who got up early to make it to the open window of the steam room. In the narrow space between workshops and courtyards live those whose hands constantly smell of lye. Soap makers boil a thick mass of ash and fat, pour it into wooden molds, and dry it under awnings where the wind does not blow ash into the cracks. The city requires them to keep their boilers away from drinking wells, put dampers on the trays, and buy up the leftover lye from the stokers so that the raw materials are not wasted. Laundresses take these pieces for a small coin and note in their notebooks how much was used for boiling during the day. When the alarm is high, soap makers are told to work with their doors closed and to clean the trays more often, because thick, soapy water is sticky and sticks to stone. This stickiness makes cleanliness visible. White rags on strings, floors shining with moisture, boards without greasy deposits. At the same time, it results in a fine if splashes suddenly appear on the area above the moat. The inconspicuous sections of city walls, where no one looks for beauty, tell more than shop windows. Where the covers over the side drains are nailed to the stone, you can see how often they were opened. The hinges are greased, the rims are dark from smoke, and the boards are slightly warped from dampness. Quarterly watchmen record the days of lubrication and the names of those responsible for the covers. During rainy weeks, they are forbidden to leave them ajar so that the flow does not reverse. If overflow occurs, The next day, they come with boards, raise the thresholds, and level the trough. The treasury does not like these lines because they require wood and labor, but without them, the mud returns to the courtyard in half an hour. In the legend, the mud grows on its own. In the document, it grows where the closed cover is not closed and the damper is not fully closed. The city's night people live at a different pace. Their route begins when everyone tries to close their windows and escape the smells. Their notebooks contain no loud words, only streets, courtyards, volumes, and delivery notes to communal fields. They are paid from the same basket that collects fines for open lids and laziness at the trough. This relationship is not romantic, but it maintains balance. If you break the rules, you pay. If you pay, they take it away. If they take it away, there is no foul smell near the market. When the alarm concerns disease, their path extends to distant ravines, and the city gives them canvas for lids and grease for hinges, so that the barrels do not swing open on bumps. The myth silences these people, because their work destroys the image of passive stench. The paper sometimes names them, as they name those who literally pull the city out of the pit every evening. Another simple pattern can be seen across the courtyards and gutters. The map of complaints and the map of drains coincide more often than is commonly thought. Where the gutter is a palm higher than it should be, the smell lingers longer. Where the owner has taken the trouble to move the threshold and bend the board, complaints are less frequent. In one notebook, a neighbor complains about the laundresses, in another about the tanners, in a third about the tavern that poured grease onto the footbridge. But the office is not interested in feuds, but in the root of the water. It orders the troughs to be moved lower, issues fines, forces the tavern to place a barrel under the drain and sprinkle ash to bind the grease, and orders the tanner to keep the lids closed on holidays. The harshness of ecology here is older than words about science. It protects not nature as an idea, but the well as a vessel. Bathhouses, when they are not closed, live like a moving mechanism. Adults leave on time, stokers change stones, and guards watch the door so that the steam does not turn into smoke on the street. Inside, there is a resounding silence, shaped by rules. Do not open the doors wide, dry the floors, wash the sheets with lye, do not bring tallow candles into the steam room so that the soot does not stick to the stones. The doctor at the cooperative, if the city can afford one, leaves notes in the book about who benefits from steam and who is better off with heated water without overheating. When the order comes to close the doors due to contagion, the cooperative breaks down into the links already mentioned. Some go to the courtyard boilers, some to the ash warehouses, some repair the troughs. Years later, only a short line saying sealed will remain in the letters, but next to it, there will always be a thicker line about how they brought cleanliness to the courtyards, how they boiled things on other people's stoves, and how they returned the steam to the stones without heroism. In markets where fish stalls, meat shops, yarn, and salt converge, sanitary rules quietly intertwine with scales. Cutting boards are moved away from the drains. Blood is collected in tubs so that it does not flow into the common ditch. Salt is kept in closed boxes and not on open trays at the very edge of the stall. Violations are punished not with thunder, but with a fine, but the fine has consequences. Tomorrow, this coin will turn into a cover. This fine will turn into a new threshold on the embankment. This record will turn into a visit from the guard, who will check whether the wind has blown the spray back onto the footbridge. A couple of simple accents, and the picture becomes less caricatured. Dirt is not a virtue or fate. It is an eternal enemy with which the city bargains through estimates. In places where the city feeds on the river, something else is visible. There are coal marks on the drinking barrels, guards at the pontoons, chains at the stairs, so that those who like to simplify their lives do not lower the troughs into the water intended for drinking. Washerwomen, are given the right to the lower pontoons, where the current carries away the mud, and they endure long routes there and back. When the alarm is raised, the ladders are removed, and barrel users stay away until the people on the lists write down that the water is fine. It is easier to build a late mockery on a picture with a closed pier. It is more difficult to read the page next to it, which lists the names of those who walked the entire line of pontoons with lids and keys and restored the city's confidence in the water. The wells themselves rarely seem to be the center of the story, but without them, there would be no story. Each has a keeper, sometimes two, sometimes more, and they are changed every year so that power does not stagnate. They check the buckets and hooks, keep an eye on the covers, and chase away those who come to rinse their troughs nearby. On holidays, they become silent queue managers. In times of alarm, they become guardians of the covers. And if a smell suddenly appears at the well, a mark appears in the book next to their names. They did not check, did not close, did not chase away strangers. The city is unfair in these places, demanding impossible calm from people whose work consists of constant anxiety. But it is precisely this overload that makes cleanliness a reality, not a pipe dream. The myth of unwashed centuries loves long shadows, and documents love short labels. Closing is the shadow. Dozens of little things on either side of it are the labels, where they closed the doors so that people would not crowd and breathe on each other in the steam room. They simultaneously boiled the laundry, blocked the trays, issued new covers, moved the rinsing down, cleaned the stones, dried the floors, lubricated the hinges, and moved the footbridges. If later it seems that the door is sealed and that's all there is to it, then the page has been read diagonally. Correct reading is slower than a meme. It listens to the creak of the hinges, counts the armfuls of firewood, notes the items of expenditure, notices how often the guard's hand rests on the latch. In this sober chronicle, there is also room for weary cruelty. Where the treasury is empty, the city shrinks and cuts back on schedules, and then complaints increase, as always happens when the craft is underfunded. Fines increase to cover the gaps, discontent multiplies, and in these waves, a familiar modernity is painfully recognizable. Cleanliness costs money, and when there is not enough of it, order disappears faster than it returns. But even in weeks like these, the machine does not abandon its habit of boiling and drying. The city does not succumb to the embrace of dirt. It lives with it as it would with bad weather, putting canvas covers on manhole covers, lubricating hinges, and cursing under its breath at the drain that is clogged again. It is not the shine that becomes a holiday, but the absence of smell. No one photographs it because it is difficult to notice. Next are private details, but they reveal a lot. In houses where living space is cramped, signs hang on the doors with the times when to take out the garbage so as not to meet neighbors face to face at the chute. Kitchens have separate buckets for lye and for garbage so as not to spread the stench of a pungent mixture. In steam rooms, stones are placed on cloths to make it easier to wipe the shelves later, and ashes are not swept into the common passageway, but are placed in closed boxes. In the courtyards, small sheds with slats are built so that laundry dries slightly to the side of the trash chute. In the evenings, announcements about sanitary changes are read in churches, and parishes ensure that the words reach the shops and courtyards. There are no big figures, but many small actions, from which the city builds cleanliness, like building bridges from short planks. That is why the result does not resemble the front line. Reality does not justify either boastful cleanliness or deliberate dirt. It is stubborn and repetitive, smells of smoke and wet wool, lye and lime, and its main feeling is anxious calm. In everyday life, bathhouses operate until they are closed to prevent contact. Laundresses boil laundry in the courtyards when the doors are sealed. Watchmen drive water downstream so that it does not return to its sources. Night people take away the excess to where it becomes fertilizer. Markets keep blood in vats and fat in ashes. Soap makers dry soft gray bars that whiten sleeves. All these are weak but sturdy walls against stench and contagion. There is no pathos in these walls, but there is debt discipline, and this discipline makes it clear why the dirty Middle Ages were washed. It simply could not survive otherwise in the cramped urban environment, where a single open gutter determined the mood of the street, and a single unclean drain made audible what everyone wanted to forget.